Shoulda worn a clean shirt by Bundibird. So, this new kid, Harley says, pushing his safety goggles, Stark Industries design, because regular safety goggles are shit, and Tony wouldn't have something so rubbish in his lab if you paid him, up through his ridiculous tumble of loose curls to rest on the top of his head. Kid needs a haircut, badly. Run me through who he is again? You look like a mad scientist, Tony says, gesturing to the goggles and the unlit welding torch and the science pun t-shirt that's got a slight grease stain across the hip where Harley wiped his hands clean on it earlier. He looks like a teenaged blonde version of Tony, is who he looks like, with the rumpled hair and the grease-smeared clothes and the goggles sitting adorably buried in his hair. But Tony senses the thought coming and deliberately turns his brain away from it. The fond warmth in his chest at the idea of Harley being even a little bit like him is skirting a little bit too close to thinking about feelings. Which, no. Feelings all of the nope. Harley grins, bright and a little bit wild, and it only serves to make him look more like he should be a cartoon villain in an underground lair. We are mad scientists, he says cheerfully, and Tony pauses. Touché, he says with a shrug, because, well, the kid ain't wrong. And this new kid is my intern, he answers, handing Harley the next square of metal he needs. And he's not new, I've had him for like 6 months now. You just haven't bothered to come see me in ages. I was here last summer, and also we literally just moved here, so we were kind of busy with the moving prep and all between then and now. Yeah, well, a lot can happen in a year, Tony says, as the kid disentangles the goggles from his curls and settles them back over his eyes, putting the new piece of metal into place and firing up the welding torch. Yeah, tell me about it, he grouses. The Accords get signed off, the Winter Soldier gets framed, that new Spidey guy joins the roster, Team Cap break an airport, break the Avengers, and break out of jail. You adopt another kid, Rhodey gets new legs, you got engaged. I left you alone for 10 months, Tony, and all this happened. It hasn't even been a full year. Tony had winced at, well, several things in that little monologue, but the Rhodey-related wince was the worst. The guy is back on his feet and loving the new braces, but the fact they're necessary at all still makes something big twitch in agony in Tony's chest. Rhodey is adamant that it's not Tony's fault, but Tony can't help the guilt he feels. He needs to pull his thoughts away from this topic right now, is what he needs to do. Who said anything about adopting? He settles on, saying, instead of addressing literally everything else Harley just said. I haven't adopted anyone, yet alone another kid. I don't know what you're talking about. Harley stops welding so that he can properly level an unimpressed look at Tony through the safety goggles. It's weirdly intimidating. Uh-huh, the kid says, everything in his voice saying, I'm calling bullshit, which, rude. A, you have a parent already, Tony points out. B, I don't even want kids. Conclusion, no one's been adopted and no one's getting adopted. I am a childless man. Harley looks at Friday's closest camera and rolls his eyes at her, as though they're commiserating. Sure, the kid says dismissively, and goes back to his welding, and he's clearly humouring Tony, which is just insulting. Tony decides to just ignore the whole exchange. Anyway, Peter, he says, getting the conversation back on track. Clever kid, you'll like him. He's cluey. Specialises more in biochem than engineering, but he's hardly a slouch in that department either, so you'll have plenty to talk about. Oh, jeez, please don't team up. I've just had a terrifying thought. You're not allowed to team up and create a biomechanical pet dog or whatever. That'll wreak merry havoc in my tower and pee motor oil on all my furniture. You know we gotta do that now, right? Harley says, grinning, and Tony points a stern finger at him. No, he says. Absolutely not. Hey, Fry, open up a folder titled The Starkling's Biomechanical Mayhem Maker, Harley says, because he's a devious little chaos-creating shit. Folder created. Friday says cheerily. Fry, delete that folder immediately, Tony says. I don't have Starklings and no one's making a biomech menace. Boss, you know that even if I delete something, there's always echoes of it that can be salvaged and restored, she says, sounding fake apologetic. Nothing is ever truly erased these days. Have you deleted it yet? Tony demands. My understanding is that pets are good for young humans, she says. Judging by the way Harley starts laughing, Tony can guess that the kid knows just as well as Tony does that she means, no, I haven't, and I'm not gonna. I'm being betrayed by my own children, Tony moans, and Harley keeps right on laughing as he goes back to his welding. It's about a half an hour later that Peter arrives. Boss, Mr. Parker is here, Friday chirps as the elevator dings and Peter steps out. Hey, Mr. Stark, sorry I'm late, And then he falters as he catches sight of Harley, who straightens up from his welding to look over at the newcomer, then does a double take and pushes his goggles up off his face into his hair, eyes wide. What the shit? He says, then punches Tony in the arm, ignoring the resultant yelp. You didn't tell me that your other adopted waif was hot. Not adopted, Tony says, on autopilot, rubbing at his newly bruised arm in offence. And then... And excuse you, what? Peter says, and blinks, his eyes wide. Oh my, Harley says, blinking rapidly and putting his welding torch down. Tony, I take it back, you're right, you haven't adopted me, he says, without looking away from the other teen. Or, you haven't adopted him. One of us. You've only adopted one of us. Because if you've adopted both of us, then that means we're brothers, and that means I can't date him. Legal and ethical minefield and all that. Peter says again, looking like he has no idea what's going on. Fair. Tony also has no idea what's going on. I already have a legal guardian? So do I, but I can have another one, so Tony can adopt me and you can be the son-in-law, Harley says, flapping a dismissive hand. And son-in-law? This is escalating extremely quickly and I'm not comfortable with it at all, Tony says. Unless you're straight, or unless I'm not your type, in which case absolutely no pressure, Harley says to Peter, as though Tony hasn't even spoken. Say no and we'll be back to being brothers and I will be 98% cool with it. 2% disappointed, but I can ignore that easily. It won't affect our new familial relationship. I haven't adopted either of you, Tony says, exasperated. No one will be brothers. Shut up, family is what you make it. If we decide that we're your kids, then you don't get a say in the matter, Harley says, flapping a hand at Tony without even looking at him. That doesn't sound correct at all, Tony says. But I'd rather be boyfriends, Harley continues, attention back on Peter, and Tony throws his hands up in dramatic defeat. Hi, by the way, Harley tacks on abruptly, apparently remembering a smidge of manners. I'm Harley, and in case I haven't been clear, you and I should totally go on a date. Does Peter even get a say in this? Tony asks, eyebrows raised, as Peter stands there like a fish with his mouth open in surprise. He would if you would stop interrupting our conversation. Oh, no, I've just realised what I look like. The kid reaches up and yanks at the safety goggles off his head and tosses them in the vague direction of the bench. He misses, and his hair is even more messy and tousled now than it was before, but he doesn't appear to notice that as he smooths his t-shirt down and then gasps in horror and yanks at the fabric so that he can eye the grease stain in despair. Man, Tony, you couldn't have warned me that I was going to want to ask him out. I would have made myself presentable. I have grease on this shirt. No, actually, never mind. If you don't love me at my worst, then you don't deserve me at my best and all. Still, first impressions count, Tony, and I have grease on my shirt and I haven't brushed my hair in 3 days. You're so like me, it's scary, Tony says. Also, I didn't know you were going to want to ask him out. Why would I possibly have known that? Well, I think you make a pretty cute first impression, Peter says, shy but resolved, and Tony does a double take, and Harley visibly brightens. What is happening? Tony moans, as Harley grins a megawatt grin, and Peter's lips quirk upwards in response. Neither of them is looking away from the other. So is that a yes to the date? Harley asks, eager. The blush is high and bright on Peter's cheeks, and he's trying to suppress a smile, but his voice is firm as he says, faux casual, "Sure." "Yes," Harley crows, and does a fist pump and everything, and Peter's attempts at keeping his smile restrained fail as the kid glances down at the ground and grins a part pleased, part embarrassed grin. When he looks back up, he's biting his lip in an attempt to corral his smile, but his eyes are bright and delighted. "What just happened here?" Tony asks, feeling winded by the whirlwind event he's just borne witness to. "I asked your intern out on a date and he said yes," Harley says, bouncing happily on the balls of his feet, and Tony reckons that the grin on the kid's face is going to take days to fade, it's that huge. "I didn't even know you were into guys," Tony says, and then gestures between both of them. "Either of you? Weren't you all hung up on that girl a few months ago, Pete? Liz?" "Yeah, that one didn't work out," Peter says, rubbing his neck awkwardly. And yet, Tony knows it didn't work out, what with her father being a big-time criminal and her mum moving her out of the state. But the point here is that Tony didn't know the kid was into dudes. "It's not the 90s anymore, people can be bi these days," Harley informs him haughtily. "Excuse you, upstart, you're talking to the original bisexual," Tony fires back with an offended expression. "I've been bi since the 70s. "Pretty sure bis existed before the 70s, so you can't be the OG bi," Harley says, the smart mouth, and Tony pulls a face at him like the mature adult he isn't. "Is everyone in this room bi?" Peter asks, and the other two blink. "Huh," Harley says, then grins. "Apparently so." "False," Friday interjects. "Dummy, you and I are all in the room, and we do not have sexual or romantic orientations at all." "Thank goodness," Tony mutters. "I can't have 5 kids out there on the dating scene." Harley throws a triumphant look at him, and Tony realises what he'd just said, and scowls. "Not that I have kids," he says, and Harley nods mock sagely. "None at all," he says, and Tony narrows his eyes at the mocking tone. "So, you and all the bots are all ace then?" Peter asks Friday, looking at one of her cameras and completely missing the back and forth between Tony and Harley. "That would be an appropriate term, yes." "Cool," Tony says, clapping his hands. "So, now that we're all out of our respective closets, can we get back to the science now?" Because he's had quite enough of being witness to this fledgling teenage romance for one day, thank you very much. "Sure thing," Harley says innocently. Too innocently. Tony's barely had time to squint his eyes in suspicion before Harley is continuing with, "Hey, Pete, how do you feel about dogs?" Pete takes the random subject change like a pro and doesn't even blink. "We're not allowed them in the apartment," he says, sounding sad about it, and Tony knows where this is going before it even goes there. "But I've always wanted a dog." "No," Tony says, but by the grin on Harley's face, he knows he's too late. Oh geez, what has he done? Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy. Have a lovely rest of your day.